In the middle of a crowded diner, a billionaire grandmother suddenly broke down in tears. It wasn't a business deal gone wrong, or a scandal splashed across the news. No, her world shattered because of a simple silver necklace dangling from a waitress's chest. A necklace she knew could not exist anywhere else. It belonged to the daughter she lost 30 years ago. And now, this tired young waitress might be carrying the secret that could reunite a broken family, or destroy it forever. What will happen when the truth finally comes to light? Margaret Whitmore was a woman whose name commanded respect in every boardroom. At 81, she still held the reins of the Whitmore global empire with an iron grip, her sharp mind calculating profit margins and acquisitions as easily as most people breathed. The financial press called her the Ice Queen of Wall Street, a matriarch who had turned her late husband Edward's modest tech dream into one of the most powerful conglomerates in the world. But for all her wealth, there was one ritual Margaret kept that had nothing to do with numbers. Once a month, she dismissed her chauffeur and slipped into a simple black sedan. She directed the driver to a quiet corner of Brooklyn, far from the skyscrapers and polished glass towers where her empire resided. There, hidden between a laundromat and a bookstore, stood a small diner called the Beehive. It was not the food that drew her, though the coffee was strong and the pie acceptable. It was memory. This was where she and Edward had shared their first real date, decades before money and ambition consumed them. In the scuffed leather booths of the Beehive, Margaret could almost hear Edward's laugh again, see the boy he had been before the world demanded he become a titan. On this particular evening, Margaret slid into her usual booth, her posture straight as ever, though her bones ached with age. She ordered water and black coffee. As she traced the rim of her glass absent-mindedly, her thoughts drifted to Edward's mischievous grin, the way he used to steal her fries without asking. A pang of longing settled heavy in her chest. "More water, ma'am." The soft voice pulled her back to the present. Margaret looked up. Standing before her was a young waitress, no more than 27 or 28. Her name tag read Clara. She had chestnut brown hair tied back in a ponytail, though a few strands had escaped, framing her kind but tired face. The uniform was clean but faded, the sort worn by someone who had washed it one too many times. There was a faint tremor in her hand as she held the pitcher, the mark of double shifts and relentless work. Margaret's gaze softened. She knew the look of exhaustion born not from idleness but from responsibility. Clara poured the water carefully, her eyes lowered. And then Margaret saw it. The light from the ceiling lamp glinted off something at Clara's neck. A delicate silver chain peeked from under her collar, holding a star-shaped locket. Margaret's breath caught. Her hand flew instinctively to her own throat, though there was nothing there now but the soft, crepey skin of age. Her mind reeled. That locket was impossible. It was not just any piece of jewelry. It was the locket. Edward had designed it himself, a 5-pointed silver Polaris star crafted by a master silversmith in Italy. It had been his 10th anniversary gift to her, a symbol of their enduring bond. There had only ever been one. Years later, Margaret had given it to her daughter, Sophie, on her 22nd birthday, the last birthday they had ever shared before Sophie stormed out of the Whitmore estate and vanished from her life forever. Now here it was, dangling casually around the neck of a diner waitress. Margaret's diamond-ringed fingers trembled as she whispered, "The necklace." Clara paused, startled by the intensity in the old woman's voice. She touched the locket instinctively, half covering it with her palm. "This? I'm sorry, is it unprofessional? I can tuck it in if it bothers you." Margaret's throat constricted, her voice cracking for the first time in years. "No. Please. Where did you get that?" The question came out desperate, raw, stripped of all the composure that had made her feared in corporate circles. Clara hesitated. Her eyes flickered with unease at the billionaire's sudden emotion. Finally, she answered softly. "It was my mother's. She said it had been in the family for a long time." Margaret's chest tightened as memories roared back, Sophie's laughter, Sophie's rebellion, Sophie's final words before slamming the door. For 3 decades Margaret had lived with silence, believing her daughter lost forever. And now, sitting across from her, wearing the very necklace that symbolized love and betrayal, was a waitress who might hold the key to that vanished past. Margaret's world tilted. The glass of water before her blurred. The clinking of cutlery around her faded. All she could see was Clara, and the star-shaped locket that had returned like a ghost. Her lips trembled. Her carefully built fortress of control began to crack. And in the middle of that humble diner, Margaret Whitmore, billionaire, matriarch, and titan of industry, felt hot tears roll down her cheeks. Clara froze, pitcher still in her hand, uncertain how to react. She had seen plenty of wealthy customers in her years working at the Beehive, but never one who looked so utterly undone by something as small as a necklace. The older woman's shoulders, once held in regal stiffness, seemed to collapse inward. Her diamond hand trembled against her lips as if she were holding back a sob. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Clara asked carefully, her voice edged with concern. Margaret shook her head, unable to form words. Her eyes, usually steel and command, were wet and vulnerable, fixed on the glinting star at Clara's collarbone. "Please," Margaret whispered hoarsely. "I have to know, what was your mother's name?" Clara blinked. Of all the questions she expected, this was not one of them. She shifted uneasily, sensing that something far greater than a casual curiosity was unfolding here. "My mother's name was Sophie," she said quietly. "Sophie Evans. She passed away some years ago." The name detonated inside Margaret's chest like a cannon blast. Sophie. Her Sophie. The daughter who had left after one brutal argument, 30 years gone. The daughter who had never returned, never called, never written. Margaret had hired private investigators, spent small fortunes chasing leads that evaporated into nothing. She had resigned herself to living with a hollow absence, an unanswered question carved deep into her soul. And now, a stranger had spoken that name back into existence. Margaret's tears spilled freely. She clutched the edge of the table, her carefully built world cracking apart in a single breath. "Sophie Evans," she repeated, as if saying it might summon her daughter back. "God help me." Clara shifted from one foot to the other, bewildered by the billionaire's reaction. The entire diner had fallen hushed, eyes discreetly glancing at the scene unfolding in the corner booth. Clara lowered the pitcher onto the table before sliding into the opposite seat, her hands clasped nervously in her lap. "I don't understand," Clara said, her voice soft but firm. "Why does this necklace mean so much to you?" Margaret's hand trembled as she pointed at it. "Because, child, that necklace was mine. My husband, Edward, had it made for me on our 10th anniversary. A star, the Polaris, he called it. He said I was his guiding light, his fixed point in the chaos of the world. When Sophie turned 22, I gave it to her. I told her it would guide her when I could not. There is only one. Only one in the world. And you are wearing it." Clara instinctively grasped the locket, her thumb brushing the familiar groove she had felt since childhood. Her mother had always told her never to open it, only to keep it safe. She had assumed it was merely sentimental. Now, across from her, sat a woman claiming it held the weight of an entire family legacy. "My mother never spoke much of her past," Clara admitted. "She said she grew up alone, that her parents had died. She worked as a freelance painter, struggled to make ends meet. We never had much, but she gave me this locket and told me it carried a story I wasn't ready to hear. She passed when I was 23, pneumonia. I never opened it." Margaret's breathing grew ragged. Every word Clara spoke cut through decades of silence. Her daughter had not been dead all those years, she had lived, struggled, raised a child. A grandchild Margaret had never known existed until this very moment. "You're her daughter," Margaret whispered, almost to herself. "You're Sophie's child. You're my granddaughter." Clara's eyes widened. Your granddaughter. She gave a nervous laugh, half from shock, half from disbelief. That's impossible. My mother she never mentioned anyone named Whitmore. Margaret straightened, her old strength returning in flickers. She would not. She left after a terrible quarrel. I forbade her from marrying a man I thought unworthy. She vanished. We searched, but, it seems my own son may have hidden things from me. Her voice faltered, but then sharpened again. But there is no doubt. You are hers. That locket is proof enough for me. Clara's pulse raced. The old woman's conviction, her tears, her raw grief, it was overwhelming. Yet the idea that she was connected to this empire, this legacy of unimaginable wealth and influence, seemed absurd. She was a waitress, barely paying rent, raising her little boy Lucas with nothing but grit. And yet, something in Margaret's eyes felt familiar. A fire. A determination. Something Clara had glimpsed once in her mother's eyes when she painted late into the night. Margaret reached across the table with trembling fingers, not touching the locket, but as if pleading with the memory it carried. Her lips parted, releasing a broken whisper. Please, child. Come with me. Let me show you. Let me explain. Everything has changed. Clara stared at her, torn between fear and the strange pull of something larger than herself. The diner seemed to vanish, the clinking of plates and murmurs of customers drowned by the pounding of her heart. Her necklace was no longer just jewelry. It was the thread that tied her to a family she had never known, and to a truth that could shatter both their worlds. The ride from Brooklyn to Manhattan felt like a dream Clara could not wake from. She sat stiffly in the back seat of the Whitmore family's Rolls-Royce, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes darting nervously around the opulent interior. The leather was soft and smelled faintly of cedar and polish. The door handles gleamed like silver. This was luxury beyond anything she had ever touched. Beside her, Margaret Whitmore sat in silence, staring out at the city lights. Her face was pale, her eyes red from the tears she had allowed to fall in the diner. Yet there was a new steadiness in her posture, as if emotion had cracked her walls only to reveal an iron determination beneath. Clara wanted to ask 100 questions, but her tongue felt heavy. Her mother's name had been spoken aloud in a way it never had before, her past rewritten in a single evening. The star locket at her chest seemed to burn with new weight. At last, the car slowed. Clara turned her head and gasped. The sedan was passing through towering wrought iron gates, black and gleaming under the floodlights. Beyond them stretched a long, winding driveway lined with manicured hedges and marble statues that seemed to watch her with cold eyes. At the end stood a mansion, sprawling and majestic, more castle than home. Its stone facade rose like something from another century, its windows glowing with warm light. Clara had never felt smaller. The car rolled to a stop beneath a grand archway. A man in a dark uniform stepped forward immediately and opened the door. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair touched with gray, his face composed and dignified. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said with a respectful bow of his head. "Welcome home." His eyes flicked briefly toward Clara, curiosity carefully hidden behind years of service. "Thank you, Charles," Margaret replied softly. "Bring tea to the library." For two. Clara followed Margaret through tall double doors and into a marble foyer that gleamed beneath a chandelier large enough to crush a car. Her footsteps echoed on the polished floor. Every corner of the house whispered wealth, paintings in gilded frames, antique vases, rugs woven by hands long dead. It was suffocating and magnificent all at once. Margaret led her into the library. Clara's breath caught again. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves lined the walls, filled with books bound in leather. A rolling ladder rested on its track. A grand fireplace dominated one wall, above which hung a portrait of a smiling man, handsome, strong-jawed, his eyes full of warmth. "My husband," Margaret said, catching Clara's gaze. "Edward Whitmore." Clara sat stiffly in the chair Margaret indicated. She felt out of place in her polyester uniform, her worn shoes leaving faint scuffs on the gleaming floor. She was keenly aware of every threadbare detail about herself. Margaret lowered herself into an armchair by the hearth, her hands trembling as she reached for the locket at Clara's throat. She did not touch it, only gestured. "That necklace," she said, her voice shaking, "holds a secret. My husband designed it as a locket. There is a clasp so small you would not notice it unless you knew. Have you ever opened it?" Clara shook her head. "No. My mother told me never to." Margaret leaned forward, urgency in her eyes. "Then open it now. Please." With hesitant fingers, Clara lifted the pendant and searched its surface. Her nails found a tiny ridge, almost invisible. With a soft click, the star-shaped locket opened. Inside, on one side, was a faded photograph, a young Margaret, her hair dark and full, standing beside Edward, who grinned with a carefree joy. On the other side was an inscription in elegant script. Clara squinted, reading aloud. "To my Polaris forever. My guide. E.W." Her voice caught. She glanced up. Margaret was staring at her with tears shimmering in her eyes. "That," Margaret whispered, "is the proof. My husband called me his Polaris. That photograph, those are your grandparents. That locket belonged to your mother. And you, Clara, you are her daughter. You are my granddaughter." Clara's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the necklace. The word sounded impossible, absurd, like something from a melodrama. But the evidence was undeniable. The picture, the engraving, the way Margaret's voice cracked when she spoke Sophie's name. "My mother never told me," Clara said faintly. "She always said her parents were gone. She never spoke of you." Pain crossed Margaret's face like a storm. She must have been hurt more deeply than I ever realized. I pushed her too hard. I thought I was protecting her, guiding her. Instead I drove her away. And I have lived with the silence ever since. The library door creaked. Charles appeared with a silver tray bearing tea. He set it down quietly, his eyes flicking between the two women with a hint of curiosity he did not voice. When he left, Margaret reached across the table. Her hand, gnarled with age yet steady now, hovered near Clara's. "Clara Evans," she said with grave sincerity, "from this moment, your life will never be the same. You are a Whitmore. My blood. My family. And I will not lose you again." Clara's heart pounded. The words felt like a promise, and a threat. She was stepping into a world of wealth and legacy, but also one of shadows she did not yet see. The following morning dawned bright, though Clara hardly noticed. She had spent the night in one of the Whitmore mansion's guest suites, a room larger than her entire apartment. The canopy bed felt too grand, the embroidered curtains too heavy, the silence too thick. Lucas had insisted on joining her, and the boy now slept soundly beside her, his small hand clutching the teddy bear Margaret had given him as if it were treasure. Clara rose quietly and wandered to the tall windows. The gardens below stretched for acres, fountains glittering in the early light. It should have felt like paradise. Instead, she felt like a trespasser, an impostor waiting to be discovered. A soft knock at the door startled her. Before she could respond, Charles entered, bowing his head politely. "Mrs. Whitmore requests your presence in the library." Clara nodded and followed him down the grand staircase, her heart drumming in her chest. When she entered the library, Margaret was already there, seated by the fire, dressed impeccably in a grey silk gown. But she was not alone. A tall man with Margaret's sharp cheekbones stood near the hearth, his tailored suit a perfect fit. His eyes were cold, calculating, and filled with suspicion. Beside him stood a woman in a glittering necklace, her beauty polished but her expression sharp as glass. "Clara," Margaret said firmly, her tone both welcoming and protective. "This is my son, Gregory Whitmore, and his wife, Victoria. Gregory's gaze swept over Clara, lingering on her uniform, the scuffed shoes, the way she clasped her hands nervously. His lips pressed into a thin line. "So," he said flatly, "you're the waitress who has caused all this commotion." Clara flushed. "I didn't mean to." But Victoria's laugh, smooth and cruel, cut her off. "A touching story, really. The poor waitress with a mysterious necklace. How convenient." She tilted her head, her diamonds catching the firelight. "And you expect us to believe your family?" Margaret's eyes flashed. "Enough. She is Sophie's daughter. My granddaughter." Gregory's jaw tightened. "Mother, please. Think rationally. For 30 years Sophie has been gone. And now, suddenly, a woman appears with a tail and a piece of jewelry. This reeks of fabrication. She's after your fortune." Clara's chest tightened. "I never asked for money. I didn't even know who you were until last night." Gregory's eyes narrowed. "Exactly. That is what makes this so suspicious. If you truly were Sophie's daughter, why hide it? Why surface now?" "She didn't hide," Margaret snapped, her voice rising. "I failed Sophie. I pushed her away. We lost her. That is on me, not Clara." Victoria smirked. "Touching sentiment, Margaret. But we live in the real world, not fairy tales. Claims like this require proof. Extraordinary proof." Gregory folded his arms. "A DNA test. That's the only way this conversation continues." The words hung in the air like a gavel strike. Clara's stomach churned. A DNA test, scientific, undeniable. Part of her wanted to refuse, to escape back to her life of quiet anonymity. But another part, the part that remembered her mother's tired eyes, her whispered warnings, her unanswered questions, longed for the truth. Margaret's face softened as she turned to Clara. "Child, I know in my heart who you are. But for your sake, for Lucas's sake, we will do this. Let them have their proof. Then no one can deny it." Clara swallowed hard, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "Fine. Do the test. You'll see." Gregory gave a curt nod, as though he had won a battle. Victoria's smile widened, triumphant. "Good. Our lawyers will arrange everything." Margaret stood, her shoulders squared with renewed strength. "Until then, Clara stays here. In this house. As my guest." Gregory's eyes darkened, but he did not argue. Victoria's smile soured into a thin line. Clara felt a strange mix of relief and dread. She was not being cast out, not yet. But she was stepping deeper into a world where she was unwelcome, surrounded by people who saw her not as family, but as a threat. As Gregory and Victoria swept out of the library, Margaret reached for Clara's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Do not fear them," Margaret said. "I failed your mother once. I will not fail you. You are a Whitmore. And we will prove it." Clara nodded, her throat tight. Yet in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. She was no longer a waitress scraping by in Brooklyn. She was standing at the gates of a dynasty. And dynasties did not welcome strangers without a fight. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of disbelief. Clara and her son Lucas moved into a guest suite so vast it felt more like a luxury apartment. The boy was thrilled, convinced he had somehow stumbled into a castle. He ran through the marble halls, explored the gardens with wide-eyed wonder, and laughed as he splashed in the indoor pool. For Lucas, this was a dream. For Clara, it was a cage gilded in gold. The Whitmore mansion buzzed with unspoken tension. The staff treated her politely but with a careful distance, their eyes betraying curiosity. They bowed to Margaret, avoided Gregory's icy glares, and whispered when they thought Clara could not hear. She was not family to them, not yet. She was a stranger who had stepped into a story that felt too incredible to be true. Margaret, however, tried to fill the silence with warmth. She spent hours with Clara, pulling out photo albums yellowed with age. There was Sophie as a child, paint smudges on her cheeks, eyes bright with mischief. There was Edward teaching her chess. Margaret's voice softened as she told the stories Clara had never heard, of a mother who had carried a fire inside her, a fire Margaret admitted she had tried to smother. She wanted art, Margaret said one afternoon, tracing her gloved finger over a photograph. She saw beauty everywhere, even in cracks on the pavement. I thought it was a waste. I pushed her toward law, business, the practical world. I thought I was guiding her, but I see now, I was crushing her spirit. Clara listened quietly. She had never seen Margaret so vulnerable, so stripped of her armor. It was strange to see the formidable matriarch reduced to a grieving mother. For the first time, Clara began to believe that perhaps, beneath the diamonds and power, there was a grandmother desperate for redemption. But Gregory and Victoria were far from idle. In their private wing of the mansion, away from Margaret's ears, their whispered conversations dripped with venom. "She's manipulating her," Victoria said one night, pacing in front of the window. Her gown shimmered like liquid silver under the moonlight. "Can't you see it? The poor, innocent waitress playing the orphaned granddaughter. Your mother is blinded by guilt." Gregory's jaw clenched as he poured himself a drink. "The DNA results will come in a week. If they confirm her claim, everything changes. My position, the inheritance, the company. I won't allow it." Victoria's eyes gleamed, sharp and dangerous. "Then we don't wait for the test. We discredit her before it arrives." Gregory turned, suspicion flickering in his gaze. "And how exactly do you propose we do that?" Victoria's lips curled into a cold smile. "Everyone has secrets. Especially people who've lived in poverty. Mistakes, debts, desperate choices. All we need is one stain, one crack, and we turn it into a scandal. Your mother values reputation above all else. If this Clara is tainted, she'll be forced to cut ties." Gregory set his glass down with a decisive thud. "Do it." Within days, a private investigator was on the payroll. His name was Robert Sterling, a man who thrived in shadows and had a reputation for finding, or fabricating, dirt when clients demanded it. He began combing through Clara Evans's past, employment records, apartment leases, credit reports. The findings were dull. Clara had worked relentlessly, paid her bills late but paid them all the same. She had no criminal record, no wild scandals. She was, by all accounts, unremarkable except for her perseverance. But Sterling was not a man who returned empty-handed. 2 years earlier, Clara had been in a minor car accident. The other driver, Marcus Thorne, had been belligerent, claiming she was at fault. Insurance had settled the case, but not before Thorne had made a scene. Sterling saw opportunity. With a few $1,000s in cash, Marcus Thorne was more than happy to remember things differently. He would now swear under affidavit that Clara had reeked of alcohol, that she had tried to bribe him with $500 to avoid police. A complete fabrication, but one polished to sound believable. Victoria was delighted. "It's not a felony," she said, holding the report in her manicured hands, "but it's enough. Enough to paint her as deceitful, reckless, unfit. When the moment comes, we plant the seed of doubt. And your mother, blinded as she is, will not be able to ignore it." Gregory gave a thin smile. "Perfect. She thinks she's found redemption in this girl. We'll show her she's found nothing but a fraud." Meanwhile, Clara remained blissfully unaware. She spent her afternoons sketching for the first time in years, inspired by the art supplies Margaret had unearthed from Sophie's old studio. She drew Lucas chasing butterflies in the gardens, Charles the butler sneaking a rare smile, Margaret nodding off in her chair by the fire. For the first time in so long, life felt almost warm. But in the shadows of the mansion, a trap was already being set. And Clara had no idea her every step was about to be questioned, her character dragged into a storm she was not prepared to fight. The atmosphere in the Whitmore mansion thickened with every passing day. Servants whispered, lawyers came and went, and the weight of anticipation pressed down like a storm. Clara tried to busy herself with Lucas, who thought the mansion was a fairy tale kingdom, but even his laughter could not erase the gnawing tension in her chest. At last, the day arrived. Margaret had summoned everyone to the library, the room that had become the center stage of revelation and conflict. Clara sat stiffly on the sofa, Lucas beside her, clutching her hand. Across from them, Gregory and Victoria sat like predators, their eyes sharp and expectant. Margaret occupied her usual armchair near the fire, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face pale but resolute. The door opened. Mr. Abernathy, the Whitmore family lawyer, entered, his calm presence a steady anchor. In his hand, he carried a sealed envelope. He greeted Margaret with a respectful nod before addressing the room. "Good afternoon," he began. "I have here the results of the DNA analysis comparing Miss Clara Evans to Mrs. Whitmore. The lab is reputable, the procedure strict. The results are conclusive." The silence that followed was suffocating. All eyes locked on the envelope as he carefully broke the seal, withdrew a single sheet of paper, and scanned its contents. His expression remained unreadable. Finally, he looked up. "The probability of grandmaternity is 99.999%. Clara Evans is, without any scientific doubt, the daughter of the late Sophie Evans and the granddaughter of Mrs. Margaret Whitmore." Clara gasped. Relief, disbelief, and vindication all rushed through her at once. She squeezed Lucas's hand, tears springing to her eyes. Margaret let out a broken sob, reaching toward Clara with trembling fingers. "I knew it," she whispered, her face radiant with joy. "I knew it in my soul." Clara smiled through her tears. For the first time, she felt the weight of belonging, real, undeniable, proven by science. But the joy did not last. Victoria's laugh sliced through the moment like shattered glass. "Well. That's settled then, isn't it? But before we start celebrating this charming reunion, there's something else you ought to know." She rose gracefully, a folder in her manicured hands. Gregory's smug gaze followed her as she stepped closer to Margaret. "What is the meaning of this?" Margaret asked, her voice sharp. Victoria's tone was sweet, but her eyes gleamed with venom. "We thought it wise to conduct a little due diligence on Miss Evans. After all, if she's to be part of this family, we should know who she truly is." She opened the folder and withdrew a document. 2 years ago, on a Brooklyn street, Miss Evans was in a car accident with a man named Marcus Thorne. According to his sworn affidavit, she was erratic, smelled of alcohol, and when he threatened to call the police, she offered him $500 to stay quiet. In other words, she attempted to bribe her way out of a DUI. The accusation hit the room like a thunderclap. Clara shot to her feet, her face pale with fury. "That's a lie," she cried. "That man was aggressive from the start. I was not drinking, and I never offered him money. This is fabricated." Gregory stood, his voice dripping with disdain. "Of course you'd say that. A waitress struggling to survive, desperation makes people do desperate things. And now, with billions at stake, your lies only grow larger." Clara turned desperately toward Margaret. "Please, you have to believe me. I've never done anything like that. My son, my whole life, I've worked for everything we have. I would never risk it." Margaret's eyes flickered between Gregory's cold certainty and Clara's frantic pleas. For a heartbeat, doubt flashed across her face. That flicker was enough. Clara felt it like a knife to the heart. The one person she had begun to trust, the grandmother she had longed to know, was hesitating. "You believe them?" Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "After everything? After the DNA test?" You still doubt me? Tears stung her eyes as the silence dragged on. Gregory and Victoria's smug smiles told her all she needed to know. Clara gathered Lucas into her arms, her voice steady despite the tremor in her soul. I don't want your money. I don't want any of this. If you think I came here to deceive you, then you're wrong. I just wanted to know the truth about my mother. And now I do. With that, she turned and fled the library, her son clutched tightly against her chest. Behind her, Margaret called her name, torn between hope and doubt. And in the smirking faces of Gregory and Victoria, Clara saw the venomous truth: this was never about family. It was about power. The DNA had proven her blood. But in the Whitmore mansion, blood was not enough. Clara's hands trembled as she stuffed clothes into her worn duffel bag. Lucas sat silently on the bed, hugging his teddy bear, his eyes wide with confusion. The guest suite, with its gilded mirrors and velvet drapes, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a prison collapsing in around her. We're going home, sweetheart, Clara whispered, forcing steadiness into her voice. Back to where we belong. She could endure poverty. She could endure long shifts and small paychecks. But she would not endure being branded a liar in front of her son. The look of doubt in Margaret's eyes, just a flicker, had been enough to sever the fragile bond Clara had begun to cherish. She shoved the final sweater into the bag and turned to check the closet. On the top shelf, almost hidden, sat a battered cardboard box she had nearly forgotten she brought with her. It contained the last of her mother's belongings, sketchbooks, brushes, and papers she hadn't had the courage to sift through since Sophie's death. Something compelled her now. Clara pulled the box down and sat on the floor. She lifted the lid and inhaled the faint scent of old paper and paint. Sketches spilled out, delicate watercolors of city streets and wildflowers. Beneath them, tied with a faded ribbon, was a bundle of envelopes. Her heart lurched. The letters were all addressed in her mother's elegant handwriting, Mrs. Margaret Whitmore, Whitmore Estate, New York. None had ever been sent. Clara's fingers shook as she untied the ribbon and opened the first. Dearest Mother. I hope this letter finds you. I am sorry for the cruel words I spoke. I was angry, but I never stopped loving you. Daniel and I are struggling, but we are happy. Please, talk to me. Clara's breath hitched. Her mother had tried. She hadn't simply disappeared, she had reached out. Another letter followed, dated months later. Mother, wonderful news, I am pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother. I know you must be angry still, but please, soften your heart. Daniel is excited. We want you in our lives. I've left messages with Gregory's assistant. Has he not passed them on? Clara's blood ran cold. Gregory. Her hands moved faster now, tearing open one letter after another. Each revealed a growing desperation. Pleas for reconciliation. Updates on her pregnancy. Descriptions of Daniel's illness, the financial struggles, the loneliness. And then the final, heartbreaking note. Mother, Daniel is gone. He died this morning. I am alone, 7 months pregnant. I called the house again, desperate to hear your voice. Gregory answered. He told me you wanted nothing to do with me. He said you disowned me. My heart is broken. I will not bother you again. Goodbye. The letter slipped from Clara's fingers. Her chest constricted with rage and grief so sharp it stole her breath. It wasn't Margaret who had abandoned Sophie. It was Gregory. He had intercepted the calls, destroyed the letters, and fed lies to both sides. He had severed mother from daughter, leaving Sophie to suffer alone, raising Clara in obscurity. And Margaret had mourned a daughter she believed lost, never knowing her own son had engineered the silence. At that moment, the door burst open. Margaret stood there, her face etched with panic. Clara, please, don't leave. I was wrong to doubt you. Her words faltered as her gaze fell on the scattered letters covering the floor. She stepped forward, picked one up with trembling hands, and began to read. Her face crumpled. Each word carved new wounds, but none cut deeper than the truth about Gregory. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He told me, he said she never reached out. He lied. My God, he lied." A guttural sound escaped her lips, a cry that was part grief, part fury. The steel in her spine returned, sharper than ever. She clutched the final letter, her eyes burning with a fire that could scorch stone. "Clara," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "He killed her. My own son killed Sophie, not with his hands, but with lies. He tore her away from me. He destroyed her life. And he will answer for it." She turned on her heel, marching toward the grand hall with Clara close behind, letters clutched like weapons. Gregory and Victoria were waiting there, smug satisfaction painted across their faces as though victory had already been won. But when Margaret approached, her hand shot out, and she struck Gregory across the face with a force that echoed through the cavernous hall. "You," she hissed, her voice shaking with righteous fury. She thrust the letter into his chest. "You told her I disowned her. You intercepted her calls. You let your sister die alone." Gregory's face drained of color. His lips parted, excuses already forming. "Mother, I was protecting you." She made her choice. Silence. Margaret roared, her voice echoing through the mansion like thunder. "You are no son of mine. You are a monster. And tonight, the truth ends with you." Victoria's painted smile faltered. Gregory's mask of control cracked. And Clara stood frozen, clutching Lucas, knowing the battle had only just begun. Gregory's face blanched under the weight of his mother's fury. The echo of her slap still hung in the vast marble hall. Margaret's hand trembled as she clutched the letters against her chest, her eyes blazing with grief and rage. "You let her die," she spat. 30 years of silence, 30 years of agony, because of you. My Sophie begged for me, and you silenced her. You told her she was disowned. You killed her with your lies." Gregory's jaw tightened, his mask cracking. "I did what was necessary. Sophie was reckless. She would have ruined everything father built. I saved the family legacy." "Saved it?" Margaret's voice rose to a roar. "You destroyed it. You destroyed us." Victoria stepped forward, her diamonds flashing under the chandelier. "Margaret, listen to yourself. You're letting grief blind you. Are you really going to believe a pile of old letters over your own son?" Margaret turned on her, her voice like steel. "Enough. I've listened to your poison long enough. Both of you have leached off this family name, twisted it into something foul. But no more." Gregory sneered, desperation seeping into his voice. "Without me, the company collapses. You think this girl, this waitress, can carry Whitmore Global? She knows nothing of power, nothing of business. She'll drag us into ruin." Clara stepped forward, Lucas clutching her skirt. Her hands shook, but her voice was steady. "I don't want your company. I never did. All I wanted was the truth about my mother. And now I know. She wasn't abandoned. She was betrayed." Margaret's shoulders squared. "And now justice will be done." She turned to Charles, who had appeared silently in the doorway, his face grave. "Call Mr. Abernathy. Prepare the papers. Gregory and Victoria are to be removed from the company board. They will receive nothing from this estate. As of tonight, they are no longer Whitmore's." Gregory's face contorted in horror. "You can't. You wouldn't dare." "I dare," Margaret cut him off coldly. "And I will. Get out." Victoria's composure cracked, her voice sharp with panic. "Margaret, think carefully. Without Gregory, you'll be seen as weak. Investors will flee. Investors will see the truth, Margaret snapped. That integrity still lives in this family. That the Whitmore name will no longer be tainted by greed and deceit. Charles stepped forward, his imposing figure leaving no room for argument. This way, sir. Ma'am. Gregory's fury boiled over. You'll regret this. You'll see what happens without me. But his words dissolved into nothing as Charles guided them toward the great doors. Their expensive shoes echoed on the marble floor, a hollow sound of defeat. The doors closed with a heavy finality, and silence fell. Margaret's strength wavered at last. Her hand shook as she pressed the final letter against her chest, her voice breaking. My daughter, my Sophie. I failed you. But I will not fail Clara. She turned to her granddaughter, her eyes brimming with both grief and newfound resolve. She reached out, and Clara stepped forward, tears spilling freely as she allowed Margaret to pull her into an embrace. For the first time, Clara felt the warmth of family she had longed for all her life. You are my blood, Margaret whispered. And your son, he is the future of this family. The Whitmores will not be remembered for greed and cruelty. We will be remembered for love. Starting now. Clara clung to her, her heart pounding with relief. For Lucas, who peeked up with innocent eyes, the mansion no longer felt cold. It felt like a home. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Clara had imagined. Mr. Abernathy handled the legal battles quietly, severing Gregory and Victoria from the empire they had poisoned. Margaret introduced Clara and Lucas to the world as her rightful family. The tabloids roared with shock, but public sympathy soon followed when the truth emerged: a lost daughter, a betrayed legacy, a granddaughter restored. At night, Clara often sat in the library, the Polaris locket cool against her skin. Margaret had placed it around her neck with solemn ceremony, calling it a symbol not of what was lost, but of what had been found. One evening, as the fire crackled, Lucas sat on the rug, arranging chess pieces under Margaret's patient instruction. Clara sketched them both, her pencil moving lightly across the page. The lines formed not just a picture, but a memory, the kind her mother would have cherished. Margaret looked up, her eyes soft, her voice steady. The Whitmore name once meant power. But now, with you, Clara, it will mean something more. It will mean hope. Clara smiled faintly, the weight of the locket a comfort against her heart. For the first time, she believed it. And as laughter echoed through the halls of the once cold mansion, the shadows of betrayal finally began to lift. This story reminds us that greed and lies can destroy even the strongest families, but truth and love always find their way back. No matter how deep the betrayal, forgiveness and second chances can heal wounds that money and power never could. Please remember, this is a fictional story, written to feel realistic so that we can all take meaning and reflection from it. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave a comment, press the like button, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means so much and helps bring more inspiring stories to life.